What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I am back in a video. This time once again, we're looking at some old NBA legends. And for this video, we're looking at some old legends who made some terrible choices late in their careers. Guys who spent a decade plus with one team, but at the very end of their careers, switched teams and made an awful jersey swap that many fans want to forget. We're going to look at roughly 10 to 12 of those players. I'll give you the rundown, the overall context and the stats as to how good they were with their new team. So with that being said, let's get into the video. So first up in our video, we do have Dwyane Wade. As you guys know, Wade played the majority of his career with the Miami Heat, but after 2016, had a brief stop in Chicago, and 2018 played with the Cavaliers. That time in Cleveland was extremely forgettable, and seeing D-Wade in a Cavaliers jersey is absolutely disgusting. And for the Cavaliers that year, he averaged 11.2 points per game, 3.9 boards, 3.5 assists on 46% shooting, surprisingly playing 46 games for that team. All in all, D-Wade at this point in his career, he was well past his prime, being 36 years old. And at his best in Cleveland, he had a 10-game stretch where he averaged 15 points per game, but besides that, he was an average to below average NBA role player at that point. And once again, seeing him in a Cavs jersey, it's just odd and perplexing, as D-Wade, he should have been a Heat lifer and never left South Beach for Chicago as well as Cleveland. Now, next up in our video, we have another all-time great shooting guard, that being Allen Iverson. And for the first 11 years of his career, he played in Philadelphia. But in the 06-07 season, he was traded to Denver. We had some pretty underrated seasons, averaging roughly 25 points per game. But only 3 games in the 09 season, he was traded from Denver to Detroit in exchange for Chauncey Billups. At that point, many NBA fans completely forget AI's career, as his time in Detroit is rarely if ever talked about. And seeing AI in a Pistons uniform, I feel like I'm in some alternate universe that I wish never existed. Now that time in Detroit is definitely forgettable, but his time in Memphis is even more forgettable, as during the 2010 season, he was traded to the Grizzlies, where he only played 3 games coming off the bench, playing 22 minutes. And that right there was really the end of Iverson's career, as he only played 25 games after that season. Now next up on our list, we have a 1990s legend, that being Dennis Rodman. And in Rodman's time post-Bulls, he played for the Lakers as well as the Mavericks. And his time in Dallas was definitely forgettable. As with the Mavericks, he averaged 2.8 points per game, 14.3 boards on 38% shooting. And in Dallas, he was typical Rodman. He was ejected from games as well as suspended by the team. And after only playing 12 games for the Mavericks, he was released and his NBA career was effectively over. And seeing Rodman in a Mavericks jersey looks like a bad Photoshop that many fans don't even remember. Now, next up on our list, we have another 1990s legend, that being Hakeem Olajuwon. And in Hakeem's career, he played his first 17 seasons with the Houston Rockets. But after the 01 season, he would leave Houston after rejecting a 3-year, $13 million deal. And after rejecting that offer, he would head east and sign with the lowly Toronto Raptors. On this Raptors team, had a very forgettable season, only playing 61 games, averaging 7.1 points per game, 1.5 blocks, 6.0 boards, and 1.2 steals. And looking at that Raptors team, they had a very weird mix of talent. You had Vince Carter, Antonio Davis, Hakeem, as well as Del Curry. A very odd, weird team that was mediocre at best. And Hakeem on the Raptors is definitely a sight to behold that many fans definitely want to forget. Now, sticking with the 1990s big man theme, next up we have Patrick Ewing. And just like Hakeem, he played 15 years with one franchise, that being the New York Knicks. But after the 2000 season, he was traded to Seattle in a 4-team deal. And that year with the Sonics up to that point was the worst year of his career, as he only averaged 9.6 points per game and 7.4 boards. And in the 01 offseason, once again, Ewing was traded, this time to Orlando, where he would end his career, averaging 6 points per game and 4.0 boards. And it really is a shame Patrick Ewing, one of the biggest icons in New York history, who played 15 years with the franchise, he went out on a very sour note, getting traded multiple times and leaving New York kinda in disgrace. Now, skipping ahead about a decade, we have one of the worst trades in NBA history that produced some of the worst uniforms of all time. That being the infamous Brooklyn Nets trade with the Boston Celtics that sent KG, Jason Terry, as well as Paul Pierce to the Nets in exchange for a plethora of draft picks. And this Nets team at the time, they were dubbed a super team, but with an old KG, an old Paul Pierce, and just an old roster in general. It's one of the biggest super team failures of all time. And for someone like Paul Pierce, who many fans thought was the Celtics for life, it was really odd seeing him in Brooklyn. And even for KG, many fans in Boston thought he retired with the Celtics and not getting traded to Brooklyn. And I think the way that team went out makes it even worse, as they barely won 40 games. Now, sticking with the Boston Celtics, next up we have Shaquille O'Neal. And as you guys know, Shaq played on his fair share of teams, playing for the Magic, the Lakers, the Suns, the Heat, the Cavaliers, as well as the Boston Celtics. And I think looking at that list, the most forgettable team he played with was indeed the Celtics. As at age 38, he signed a 2-year, $3 million deal that would keep him in Boston up till 2012. But in his last ever season, he averaged 9.2 points per game, 4.8 boards, on 68% shooting, only playing 20 minutes per game. And for someone like Shaq, who is Lakers royalty, one of the top 10 players of all time, seeing him in Boston was one of the weirder LA-Boston kind of rivalry things. Many players have played for both teams, but seeing someone like Shaq in a Boston uniform, it really was odd for the rivalry and didn't make much sense. And unfortunately for Shaq in the 2011 Celtics, that would be his last ever season due to a severe injury. Now, next up on our list, we have another perennial all-star from the 2000s, that being Tracy McGrady. And in T-Mac's career, he did play with a handful of teams just like Shaq, but his most notable stops were in Toronto, Orlando, as well as Houston. After that, it gets pretty murky, as well as pretty forgettable. As in 2010, he played with the Knicks, averaging 9.4 points per game and a 24-game sample size. In 2011 with the Pistons, where he averaged 8 points per game, and then in 2012 with the Atlanta Hawks, where he averaged 5.3 points per game. And after that at T-Mac, it seemed like his NBA career was over, as for a brief stint, he played in China. But as very few NBA fans know, during the 2013 playoffs, the San Antonio Spurs actually signed T-Mac. And in 6 games, he averaged 0.0 points per game, 1.3 boards, 1.2 assists, on 0% shooting. So T-Mac in his later years, he definitely bounced around, and his last stop in San Antonio was definitely an odd one. Now, staying in San Antonio, next up, we have Tony Parker. And as you guys know, Parker played 17 years with the Spurs, winning 5 championships and being their best point guard in franchise history. But after the 2018 season, due to some contract negotiations, Parker would find himself on the outside looking in for a San Antonio Spurs roster spot. So with that being the case, he picked the most random team ever, that being the Charlotte Hornets. And for the 2019 season, he was the Hornets' backup point guard, playing 56 games. And I will say Parker in those games, he was definitely pretty good, averaging 9.5 points per game, 3.7 assists, on 46% shooting. And keep in mind at this point Parker, he was 36 and only playing 18 minutes. So Parker at that advanced age, I guess he did prove to Pop he could still play, but once again seeing Parker in a Hornets uniform is definitely unfortunate, as he was definitely a Spur for life. Now, sticking with the great point guards of the 2000s, next up we have Steve Nash. In Nash's prime, he played with Dallas as well as Phoenix, winning 2 MVPs and being their best point guard in franchise history. But after the 2012 season, at age 37, Nash was traded to the LA Lakers to form a super team with Kobe as well as Dwight Howard. And prior to that trade, Nash, he was still an all-star level point guard, averaging 12.5 points per game as well as 10.7 assists on near 50-40-90 splits. But as most NBA fans know, his time in LA was disastrous, as he was rarely on the court with Kobe as well as Dwight at the same time. And for those final 2 years in LA, he would only play 65 games with the team, as he was injured virtually every other week. And seeing Nash in a Lakers uniform, it's not really that weird, but I think the pictures, they just bring back bad memories for Lakers fans, as the 2013 Lakers were one of the biggest disappointments in franchise history. Now, getting to the end of the video, we have another 1990s legend, that being Scottie Pippen. And as you guys know Scottie, he's a Bulls legend and a 6-time NBA champion. I still think to this day many NBA fans, they only associate Scottie with the Chicago Bulls. But after the '98 championship season, Scottie, he would be traded to Houston, where he signed a 5-year contract worth nearly $70 million. And for someone like Scottie, who was underpaid virtually his entire career, you can definitely understand that move, as well as his motivations. And playing in Houston, he was still a pretty good player, averaging 14.5 points per game, 6.5 boards, as well as 5.9 assists with 2.0 steals. But after that dumpster fire season in Houston, he would be traded to Portland, where he actually played 4 seasons. And during his time with the Blazers, he once again was pretty effective, as during a 4-year stretch, he averaged 11.4 points per game, 5.3 boards, as well as 5.0 assists, with Portland nearly making the NBA Finals in 2000. So once again, for Scottie, a Bulls legend, it is kind of weird seeing him in different uniforms, and his time with the Rockets was especially forgettable. Now, last up on our list, we have the most infamous jersey swap in NBA history, that being Michael Jordan coming out of retirement and playing with the Washington Wizards. And what makes this the worst jersey swap of all time is that MJ, he ended his career on the perfect note, hitting the game winner versus the Jazz. And for some odd reason, he came back for 2 years, playing in Washington. And I will say in his defense, even at age 38 and 40, he was a pretty effective player, averaging roughly 21 points per game. And he was healthy, he was upwards of 25. But still, seeing him in Washington with those Wizards uniforms, it wasn't a pretty sight, and it wasn't prime MJ, an iconic Bulls MJ. Now that right there is our last player, and that is the conclusion to the worst uniform swaps of all time. As always, thank you guys for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.